I am Pete Clattenbrock, and I'm going to be your MC today for the Planet Stage. Our apologies for starting a bit late today. Running a hybrid festival is a new phenomenon, as all innovations comes with some teething issues. But stick with us, because we have some absolutely fantastic sessions lined up for today. Given that we are starting a little bit behind schedule, we're going to go straight in with our first session, which is focused on raising climate ambition and the opportunity COP26 offers for doing so. Our moderator for this session is Edie Lush, the executive editor at Hub Culture, who is going to be guiding us through this conversation. Edie, over to you.
Really delighted to be here with you today, and welcome to this opening session on the Planet Stage, CogX 2021. Richard Walker can't make the session, but I'll introduce the rest of my guests in just a moment. My name is Edie Lush. I'm executive editor of Hub Culture and also the co-host of the Global Goals Cast podcast, and delighted to say that this is also a live recording of the Global Goals Cast, the podcast that explores how to change the world. So we know that we need to raise our climate ambition. We're coming to the point of no return. That was the Secretary General of the United Nations just the other day. We know that the rich world is not doing enough to curb greenhouse gases, and many countries are still addicted to fossil fuel. That's how he put it. So we need action now before it's too late. And we have a really impressive group to help identify those actions. At Global Goals Cast, we often talk about the champions who are making the world a better place, making a difference. Today, we have somebody with us who actually has the word champion in his job title. Joining us from sunny Devon, Nigel Topping. You're going to be talking in a moment about your work going country to country to get governments to raise their climate ambitions before the UN climate conference, COP26, and that is in Scotland later this year. Also with us today, Kate Hampton, CEO of Children's Investment Fund Foundation, which funds actions that accelerate climate change mitigation. How are you, Kate?
Very well, thanks. Good morning.
Good morning. Good to at least hear you. And with me here in the studio, waiting patiently, Anjali Raman-Middleton, co-founder of Choked Up, our teenage champion who is empowering young people to fight air pollution. Nigel Topping, could you set the scene for us, first of all? We're about 140 days away from COP26, the UN Climate Summit, and you're a key member of the team preparing for this summit. The Secretary General says we're way off course in preventing catastrophic climate change. So talk us through what we know now from the science about how much more ambitious the higher income countries need to be on their pledges by November, and how you're doing in getting them up to those pledges.
The good news is that everybody's converging on agreeing that we need to get to net zero as soon as possible, and by 2050 at the latest. And the science says that means we've got to reduce emissions by 50% by 2030. And we're having growing signals of ambition from the most developed countries. The G7 just are all committed to net zero. The real issue now, and my work is actually with the non-state actors, so with cities, businesses, civil society, so that the whole of society ratchets up ambition to send a message to national governments that they can go faster and they have to go faster. So we've got the right levels of headline ambition. It's got to be turned into concrete short-term action. That means money flowing into innovations, into capital, into the solutions that we know in areas like transport and power, and into the accelerated innovation in areas where we know we've got to do better, like cement, steel, and green hydrogen. So the real issue now is turning all of that ambition into short-term action. Otherwise, we just have hot air without specific movement on the ground, changing and reducing emissions in the real economy.
Given the priorities, where do you see an urgent need to put more investment and in what technologies?
So Children's Investment Fund Foundation is a philanthropic foundation. We do some impact investing, but most of our work is actually grant making to civil society. And we work very closely with governments, and we fund a range of things from advocacy and campaigning all the way through to technical assistance for governments, as well as litigation where governments don't actually implement the laws that they introduce. And to Nigel's point, I think there is real clarity on the direction now, even around fossil fuels. We've seen recently from the International Energy Agency and then at the G7, real clarity on the need to move away from fossil fuels. But as Nigel was saying, the problem is near-term action. So from a philanthropic perspective, the key thing for us is really identifying those opportunities for acceleration. Number one, of course, is political activism by citizens. Without pressure on governments, without citizens voicing their concerns about climate change and clamoring for accelerated action, politicians will not take the necessary steps. Similarly, businesses need to be under pressure from civil society. Civil society needs to hold them accountable for the kinds of pledges that Nigel has been organising. As we've seen with both countries and companies, we've got a lot of N0 and 1.5 pledges, but the near-term plans, the plans in the next 5 years, don't add up. And those are so crucial if we're going to halve emissions. So what we're doing is all around the world where we have NGOs that we can work with, we're supporting their activities, whether it's in the energy sector or in terms of air pollution in cities, to keep those campaigns going and for experts and governments to have the information that they need to introduce the policies that will drive the change in the near term.
Thank you. So you mentioned that we need citizens actively campaigning, and we have a citizen with us in the studio today. So Anjali, you've made pollution your cause. What are you asking for?
Well, one of the main goals of my group, Choked Up, is the inclusion of young people and ethnic minorities in this movement, because we are disproportionately affected by air pollution and we really need to be involved in finding solutions for it. And so climate change and pollution are quite similar problems. So the impacts are very similar and the actual solutions are very similar as well. And so our asks of including young people and people of colour in this movement need to be extended beyond just clean air into climate change as well, and our approaches to tackle that. And so because at the moment, the main people making decisions are those who are least affected by climate change and environmental issues. And we need to make sure that young people and BAME people who are on the front of this crisis are being included in these rooms and actually making these decisions, because if our solutions aren't protecting everyone, then they aren't actually solutions at all. And even our language when we're talking about climate change really has to change, because when we say, oh, this is something that will be affecting us in 10 years' time, we're ignoring the fact that it is affecting so many people right now as we speak. And the majority of the people that it is affecting are living in the global south. And we need to make sure that we are addressing the issues that are facing them and not just focusing on the Western world. We need to be thinking about the fact that so many islands right now are already flooding, and we need to be taking drastic action to stop that happening right now.
Thank you, Anjali. And in fact, in my home state of California, one of the cities that I used to go to as a child growing up in the Central Valley, you now turn on the tap and no water comes out. So absolutely. Nigel, let's come back to you. Is there a strategy for getting the key emitters of carbon aligned, the US, Europe, China, and India?
Countries must come forward with more ambitious plans informed by the latest state of the science and of technology. So the Paris Agreement is designed to align. What we're doing with everybody else is trying to align around sector by sector the most ambitious pathway that we know is both possible and necessary to get us to net zero. And we see some movement there. We're seeing discussed this weekend, although we'd like to see more detail on actual dates for phasing out of coal, actual dates for moving to 100% electric vehicles. When policymakers say we're going to stop the sale of combustion engines in 2030 or 2035, then that's a result of technology changing, of businesses changing, of investors changing, of mayors responding to the kind of work that Anjali's doing in terms of clean air. It then sends a signal which allows everybody else to go faster, and we get that sort of ratcheted ambition. We know the pathway in every sector, but we've got to get a critical mass of people to agree on the actions in the next 5 years. So steel, we've got to move towards different ways of producing steel that don't require coal. So there's a new company in Sweden is going to only be making steel with green hydrogen. We need to make sure that governments and and markets are supporting that move, so we can go much faster in the areas where we still need more technological development.
Talk me through, Nigel, while I've got you, some of the other sectors that you think require the most focus. You mentioned steel. I know concrete is another one. Is there an innovation that you see we need to get money behind?
So I distinguish between sectors where we really know the solution and it's mature, and we need to really scale up. So power, we need to significantly scale up deployment of renewables. Tech's got a huge role there in terms of ensuring we have stable and optimized grids. Transport, as I say, we know we can get to a fully electrical vehicle fleet much quicker than anyone thought even a couple of years ago. Nature-based solutions also we can deploy at scale and have the promise of a third of the reductions we need by 2030. The areas where we need more technological development would be green hydrogen, sustainable aviation fuel, zero carbon shipping, cement and steel would be the big five that I would mention, where we kind of know what needs to do, but we're in early stage, so we need a lot more investment in technology to get the costs down to the point where those solutions can be scaled up in the 30s.
Kate, can I bring you in on that point as well, in terms of the sector investment and the role that philanthropy can play in bringing other actors involved?
Yeah, so I mean, clearly there are lots of things that civil society and philanthropy can do in partnership with businesses and governments, in particularly designing appropriate regulatory frameworks and incentive frameworks is going to be absolutely crucial. What drives down the cost of technology is in fact large-scale deployment. So cost comes down very, very quickly when things are deployed at scale. So we need coordinated action across countries and cities. We need businesses procuring green technologies. If everyone goes big, the cost will come down much, much faster. And of course, we need the R&D in the labs, but that's no use unless you can bring it to market. So I think the partnerships are really around deployment and setting the right signals. So we've got the direction of travel, but now we need the sort of hard regulation and the incentives to bring those forward. Because if you can't charge a premium for green cement, you're not going to bring the technologies out of the lab. So you've got to have cities, for example, procuring green cement and preferring it over other kinds of cement. So all of that needs to be done in partnership, public, private, civil society, governments, cities, and so on. And so that's an absolutely crucial piece of work. A couple of other areas that haven't been mentioned so far. One is land use. Our entire food system needs to be completely reformed. It doesn't deliver on nutrition, it doesn't deliver on environmental protection, and it doesn't deliver on livelihoods. Some of that is technology, but a lot of it, again, is to do with reforming subsidy regimes and incentivizing the right kind of food. And that's a very substantial share of the problem and a major driver of deforestation. So land use also needs to be thought of in terms of creating these major partnerships between public, private sector and civil society to drive those solutions forward. And finally, I think it's really important to underline the importance of finance. So we are in the middle of a major financial crisis for low-income and middle-income countries. Rich countries that can print their own money and finance their own debt have come out relatively well of the pandemic. But low-income countries and middle-income countries, their fiscal buffers are completely exhausted by the pandemic, by the socioeconomic fallout. And so we really do need a complete restructuring of the international financial system to enable those countries to participate in a green and resilient recovery. And I think that's really where the G7 didn't meet the target this weekend. They've set the direction and the tone, but they have failed to deliver the resources so that everyone can participate in a green and resilient recovery. So if you're talking about deploying key technologies in low-income countries or middle-income countries without the right financial incentives and the blending of public and private finance, that's going to be very difficult. So we need to make sure that everyone can participate in this transformation, and finance will be crucial in delivering that.
Anjali, you speak to members of the Green Party, sometimes the Labour Party, and I know that what we've heard from Nigel and Kate is how important it is for cities to hear people like your voice, and that drive from the push up. When you are calling for things in different industrial sectors, what are you calling for?
So a lot of the time what we are calling for is for them to listen to young people, because every young person I know cares about climate change to varying degrees, obviously, but all of us, this is something that we really, really do care about, and we want to see industries and government taking action on. And I think something that's really important to bear in mind is increasingly we will be able to vote. And as soon as young people start to be able to vote, we will start to vote for parties that have strong climate policies. And the parties that don't will simply be voted out. And this is happening all around the world. People are getting older, and so many of the big polluters in the world have young populations. And as these young people get older, they will have to start listening to us, because we will be determining who's in power. And so I think that that's something that we are really pushing for as a generation, is just trying to get people to listen to these demands and trying to force them through our own activism, through our own social medias, through our own actions and consumerism, to take climate action and listen to what we're saying. And this extends not just to governments, but also to businesses, because I think a lot of people my age now care about ethical consumption. And that is something that
you buy or avoid based on a brand's commitment to climate change.
Yeah, so I try to avoid buying stuff like clothes firsthand. I try to shop more secondhand. And this is something that I know a lot of my friends do as well. And you see posts about it on social media all the time. So it's something that we as a generation are increasingly trying to do. And I think as we get older and we get more power in society, we will maintain these views, and it will have to be governments and corporations that change to supply to us instead.
Well, that is a message of hope for sure. I'd love to get Nigel and Kate a good news story from you on one of these industrial sectors that you mentioned. I'd love to hear a story potentially from some other part of the world, whether it's green hydrogen, interesting use of land. Can you give us an example of where we are seeing the kind of change that needs to be scaled up? Nigel.
Green hydrogen will be about anything from 10 to 20% of the final energy mix when we've decarbonized all power and electrified everything that we can. And you're starting to see very serious money flowing, in Australia, which at the federal level doesn't have enough ambition yet. You're seeing some huge projects taking advantage of the huge land and sun that they have there. I mentioned this a green steel company that's just starting up in Sweden that already has orders, because companies like car companies and construction companies who are committing to net zero can only get there if they buy zero carbon steel, because it's a commitment across the whole value chain. So I think that it's early days, but the signals are very strong there, and you're starting to see national governments match that ambition. And then just recently, America launched its green hydrogen Earthshot to drive the cost down, as Kate was saying, through deployment to less than $1 a kilogram, which is really game changing in the world energy system. So that would be my example for today.
Thank you. Kate, what about you?
I'm going to take a different tack. I'm going to talk about behavior. So I think what's really exciting is that we're seeing the proliferation of walking and cycling in major cities around the world. The work of C40 in terms of its Green Recovery Task Force has shown that there's real appetite in lots of cities for people to have non-motorized transport. And we're also seeing a generation of young people in Europe who don't want to buy cars. If they need a car, they'll car share. I've recently moved into a flat which is a car-free development. You're not actually allowed to have a car permit. I've never owned a car. So the faster we can move away from cars and onto cycling and walking in cities and have more green spaces, it will be better for everyone. I would love for my kids to be able to play in the street. At the moment, it's not safe. They have to cycle on the pavement to school. So with the great campaigning of organizations like Choked Up and many of those around the world, I think this fight for air pollution reductions, the fight for climate protection, it has so many benefits, and shifting behavior. I think we're going to see a generational shift in behavior, and hopefully the middle-aged and the baby boomers will join the young people in making that shift.
Thank you. Anjali, any good news story to wrap us up?
I mean, I think a lot of it has already been said. There is a massive behavioural shift, and I think increasingly we will see people start to listen to us as we get older. And I think that is something that gives me a lot of hope that we will actually be able to get out of this.
Great. Thank you guys very much. Thank you to Nigel, to Kate, and to Anjali. I've been delighted to be with you here today. My name's Edie Lush, and back to the studio.